Welcome to Caribbean Tea. From St. Vincent, Kendall Morgan, in Georgetown, Guyana, Dennis Chabral, and I am Vivian Williams in New York. This is Caribbean Tea, the podcast where we stir the pot on the region's most pressing issues, social, legal, cultural, and political, with unflinching honesty and thoughtful analysis. These are bold conversations, steeped in truth and clarity. Today we are examining a political story that began with hope and unraveled in mistrust. They were like prodigal sons, leaving behind their political homes to forge a new path. Publicly, Raphael Trotman and Kemrab Charamjatand voiced grave concerns about the direction Guyana's two dominant parties were taking the country. From that discontent and from the idea that Guyana was teetering on the edge of a cliff, the Alliance for Change was born. For many, it was a moment of hope, a chance to disrupt Guyana's bitter political duopoly, and disrupt they did. By 2012, the once mighty People's Progressive Party, PPP, had been brought to its knees. In 2015, a decade ago, its iron grip on power was finally broken. On the other side of power, the People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, had rebranded into a party of alliances. It had humbled itself into a new formation, the Partnership for National Unity, or APNU. The AFC's rise posed a new and real threat. And so the PNC courted it, and one of the prodigal sons, Trotman, returned, this time with a following. In 2015, the union was sealed. The APNU+AFC coalition was born. The mission to break the back of the seemingly unshakable PPP. The marriage was hailed as a bold experiment in multi-ethnic power sharing. But it didn't shatter the duopoly, it reshaped it. The PPP was weakened. The PNC grew stronger through what some may call political polygamy. Holding hands with knives, Guyana's coalition saga is the story we are examining today. Behind the smiles and the ceremonial handshakes was a fragile marriage, one built on strategy, not trust. After defeating the PPP and taking power, the coalition soon began to unravel. The prenuptial promises were ignored, disputes became routine, grievances were met with procedural dead ends. By 2020, the coalition had collapsed under the weight of infighting, election controversies, and mutual suspicion. And now, as Guyana barrels towards the 2025 general elections, those once united stand apart, unable to agree on a common front. What went wrong? Was the coalition ever built to last? And with stakes higher than ever in a resource-rich, deeply divided Guyana, can unity rise from the rubble? To unpack these questions, we are joined by three of the most consequential voices in this political saga. Mr. Aubrey Norton, current leader of the People's National Congress Reform, Mr. Nigel Hughes, newly elected leader of the Alliance for Change, and that voice in the wilderness, Dr. David Hinds, political activist and leader of the Working People's Alliance. We'll explore the promise, the breakdown, and the road not taken. This is Caribbean Tea. Let's begin. Dennis?
Good afternoon, gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of Caribbean Tea. Coalitions have historically been pivotal in seating the incumbent People's Progressive Party. In 1964, the PNC and United Force Coalition wrested power from the PPP. And then, after the PPP returned to power in 1992, the APNU+AFC coalition was unseated. After more than 2 decades in power, in the context of this reality, is an APNU+AFC imperative in 2025, or could the parties successfully paddle their own canoe? Mr. Norton, what's your perspective on this? given all the experiences that the political environment has gone through, dating back to the formation of AFC and APNU and where we stand today? Can the parties actually come together in their own single canoe to contest the elections against the PPP?
Well, in the first place, if one looks at it from a certain perspective, you will see that the PNC has moved away from the position that it wants to or is going to win alone. It is for that reason we became involved in a partnership for national unity. And so as a partnership for national unity, there are a number of forces organized with us. We, however, believe that we would have been better served if we could have had a coalition involving all opposition forces. Unfortunately, that eludes us.
And for you, Mr. Hughes, do you see your party at this juncture finding its way into that single canoe to head down to polling day on September 1, 2025?
Good afternoon, Dennis. Good afternoon, Kendall. Good afternoon, Vivian, Aubrey, David. Thank you for having me in the program. Dennis, I would say that we have tried, and we've tried, and we've tried. I believe both sides with the ultimate objective of Guyana in our minds and what's best for Guyana. But it has eluded us.
Dr. Hinds, the Working People's Alliance historically has always seen itself as a party that's pushing for a broad national front, multi-ethnic approach to Guyana's politics, a multi-party approach to the problematique that faces Guyana historically. That's the race class problem that challenges the country's development. As a small party with that historical bearing, what is required at this juncture to bring the two major contenders as far as this coalition objective is concerned together in a single canoe so they can paddle their way to the polling stations as one for the upcoming polls?
Well, without being presumptuous or condescending, I think one of the preconditions for coalition in our circumstances has to be an understanding of the historical moment, what the moment demands. And I think the present moment, from our perspective, demands as a first step to rescuing the country as we move into a petro state is the removal of the PPP as a single party governing the affairs of our country. They are really taking Guyana down a path that we would have great difficulty recovering from if they were to be given another 5 years on their own in power. And so this historical juncture demands that the opposition forces, in particular the major opposition forces, the AFC and the PNC, we would like to think that we are a senior part of that force, although we are usually not treated in that way. But we feel that if there's an understanding of the historical moment and what is needed, then 75% of the work towards coalition would have been finished. And it would then be left to working out the mechanics and so forth. I don't think our leaders have certainly not the grasp of what is needed at this moment and how badly the nation, certainly half of the nation, would want the PPP to be removed from office as a way of resettling and resetting our country moving forward. I think it's not too late for all of us to really dig our teeth into that understanding. But as we in the Working People's Alliance have said, We recognize the plurality of our situation. Our parties come from different ideological perspectives. They come from different perspectives of how they see the real politics. And at the end of the day, it is left to each party to make that decision. But if we were to suggest, we would say, look at the historical moment, listen to the heartbeat of your people, and listen to a basic question that they're asking. I have never seen such a universal feeling for coalition in any section of our ethnic or social constituencies. Everywhere I go, every time I speak to someone who refers to himself or herself as a supporter of the quote-unquote opposition, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is coalition. The Working People's Alliance hears that, is guided by that. And so therefore, despite our misgivings, and we have a lot of misgivings, given the last experience of coalition. Despite that, you are guided by that heartbeat coming from the people. They are pointing you in a historical direction.
I want to jump in here with a question for Mr. Norton and Mr. Hughes individually. The question is the same to both. It is, do you feel, Mr. Norton, in 2025, your party is stronger by itself now than it was in 2015? And to you, Mr. Hughes, do you feel that in 2025, standing on its own legs, the AFC is stronger than it was in 2015? Let's start with Mr. Norton.
Well, the fact that we, from the inception, indicated that we wanted coalition, the fact that we have done everything to bring coalition, we thought the priority should be coalition. I don't think the issue here is whether we were stronger in 20 now than in 2015, because to ask that question also presupposes that your opponent has the same strength, and therefore you need more to defeat them. I think the issue here is that the People's Progressive Party has used power in a very arbitrary way, and that they clearly have no plan for the development of the people of Guyana, though there is a plan to utilize the resources to enrich people. And so it is in that context I would see where we should head. We should be heading in the direction of a coalition. And I draw a distinction between a coalition and power sharing, even though there is some element of power sharing in it. One, the elites of the movement have to believe and want coalition. That's a kind of a precondition. The second precondition is that there's an assumption about how much support each section has in the present political milieu and what they bring to the table. And therefore, as you discuss that situation, you have to be cognizant of the fact that we come with different levels of capabilities and in different areas, and those should be factored in into determining the kind of mechanism you put in place to ensure that there is a coalition.
Go ahead, Mr. Hughes. Let's hear from you on that question. You could use as much time as Mr. Norton used, though I was expecting a short answer.
No, I don't need the time. You asked a very simple question. No, the Alliance for Change is not at the same strength it was in 2015.
I want to come back to you, Mr. Norton, on that same point, and I'll give you time to elaborate. You point out that there is another variable that the question eludes, and that is the present weakness of the PPP, your opponent in 2025. Looking back in 2015, I think it would be noted and accepted that the PPP was a very weak party going into the 2015 elections. Is it your view that in 2025 that the PPP is weaker than it was in 2015?
The answer is yes. I think they're much weaker within their own constituencies. You're seeing dissent and people dissatisfied with what they're doing. So I think they are weaker, and the high level of corruption in the society has resulted in a situation where they are weaker.
Having successfully worked together in the period in office of the coalition 2015 to 2020, when did things start to unravel, and how?
I think I missed the question. I thought you were just making a general comment. What is the question?
I'm saying, having had a successful term in office between 2015 and 2020 as a coalition government, APNU+AFC, when and how did things start to unravel for the coalition?
It's a very difficult question to answer. Again, the assumption is made that it was together in 2015. I think at 2015, there were compromises. And so at the very last minute, on the 13th of February, you got a coalition. I believe that modalities weren't developed in government to ensure political party views could be heard, as well as mechanisms to deal with conflict within the coalition. And so I would say from the inception, they did not develop the modalities to ensure a coalition not only function properly, but survive. I mean, the WPA's position as to why they were leaving was indicative of the problems internally.
I would like to take both of you gentlemen, that is, well, of course, Dr. Hinds as well, back to what had obtained in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That's actually the home country of Kendall Morgan, a noted Caribbean journalist, where Sir James Mitchell had only won his seat in his constituency. And even though his party and himself were small in nature, at the end of the day, he became the prime minister because either of the two major parties had to take a decision to coalesce with him. Now, my question to you gentlemen is, notwithstanding what Mr. Norton has indicated, if not said explicitly, about the reality that the PNC is a big party, and Mr. Hughes also saying that his party is a small party, why in the case of the PNC, can't you see the value of making even greater compromises, though the AFC is small in nature, because ultimately the objective is to achieve what Sir James Mitchell achieved in his country, that is to gain power and even retain power? Mr. Norton.
Well, in the first place, I thought the analysis is flawed. You're comparing a first-past-the-post system with a proportional representation. When
At the end of the day, it's power.
Allow me to finish.
Well, I'm just responding to the point of you saying the argument be flawed.
Look, you are dealing with a first-past-the-post system in which Mitchell went into an election. And though it comes over as Mitchell winning one seat, when you add the total votes, Mitchell party did well. But because it was a first-past-the-post system, it appears as though it is one seat that had the support of all the rest of seats. Mitchell had a certain level of popularity, and when you look at the popular votes, if I remember carefully, Mitchell's party was much stronger, though many of the candidates lost by narrow margins. And the point I'm making here is that one cannot compare the results in the first-past-the-post system with one in what you call it?
Proportional representation.
Proportional representation. In the 1961 elections in Guyana, the PNC got 89,000 votes. The PPP got, I think, 91 or 92,000 votes. But the PPP ended up with a preponderance of seats more than the PNC. And so though the PNC was second, it was by a narrow margin, but it showed that it was popular because the overall, they were only beaten by 2,000. To compare Michel found himself in a position where he was still in a strong party, but because of first past the post, many of his candidates lost by a narrow margin, and the political parties that purportedly won came out with more seats. But in terms of the popular vote, he was not a one-seat majority. And that is the point that needs to be made here.
But in the end, he still had to strike compromises with the other parties to ultimately become prime minister.
No, I agree. And
that is the core element I'm getting at. What
this
will
is
it require?
This is a political analysis, Dennis. People listening to you would have felt that here is a man that got this presidency, this prime ministership, based on one seat, with no reference to the popular vote. I'm pointing out to you, there are two different systems, and whether it is St. Vincent or where, in politics, you have to make compromise. And so I'm not opposed to compromises. I agree with compromises. What I disagreed with is where you extrapolate from that situation and sought to put it in the Guyana situation, which to me was out of context.
But Mr. Hughes' party ultimately doesn't have many seats or votes in this case. So hence, I'm trying to get at you to ascertain what compromises are possible between the two of you and your parties, and ultimately hear from Dr. Hinds, how we can have this issue dealt with, get advantage of Guyana as you see fit. Mr. Hughes.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Dennis. I'm not sure what the question is for me. I think you asked Mr. Norton whether the People's National Congress would make, as they were the larger party, whether they would make compromises. So I clearly...
Is your party willing to make compromises to achieve the universal objective as far as the opposition is concerned, to wrest power from the PPP, notwithstanding the fact you're a small party? What more can you bring to the table as far as compromises and advantage are concerned?
Well, I've already identified a couple of things. One is that we are not in the same position we were in 2015. There are many reasons for that, including the fact that there was a coalition that did not perhaps work out the way the parties had intended. In relation to your second question about compromises, we're always disposed to make compromises in the best interest of the country. It's just a question of perspective, I suppose.
What more can you do?
What more can we do in terms of...
what more can you put on the table as compromise to achieve the total objective?
I'm not sure what the context in which you're asking the question. I think today, as we speak, we're past that stage. If you're asking from an analytical, historic perspective, perhaps I'd be in a better position to answer that. But I don't know what facts you have available. So when you say what more, I don't know what context you speak, what information you've received. And when you say more, whether you are in possession of what the offers come to office and various positions were. So I may be responding in a context in which your audience is not familiar with what went on before. And I'm very...
But isn't your party over the last few days mulling, meeting again to probably even make another offer to APNU?
No, Dennis, you must have missed the last 2 or 3 public statements or press conferences.
No, I'm not talking about the public statements. Weren't you supposed to have met within the last 24 to 48 hours again to see what more you can put on the table?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I don't know if Mr. Norton is aware. I am not aware of any arrangement.
No, not a joint meeting at the level of your party.
So in what? I'm not following you, Dennis. Meeting between...
I'm asking if your executive of your party was not supposed to meet within the last 24 to 48 hours to see what more you can put on the table to the APNU to see whether anything else is possible.
No, I'm unaware of that.
You're unaware?
Yeah.
I'd like to bring Dr. Hinds in here. I'll try to play a clip and I want Dr. Hinds to respond in the context of what he has been saying long before now. And Dr. Hinds, feel free to take into consideration what has been put to the other two guests by Dennis when you respond to my question. But let's go to the clip first.
Mr. Granger assumed the presidency, and he was not of the same thinking as Robert Corbyn. He did not believe, as we now can say, given his performance as leader of the APNU. He's not a coalition person. He's not. He's a person that believes in the dominance of the big party.
Dr. Hinds, is this a position you still hold, that the way in which the big party or the big parties dealt with coalition politics in the last iteration affected and muddied the waters and made things difficult for a coalition today?
The simple answer is yes. Yes, I felt so. We felt so at that time, and we feel so even in the context of the present negotiations between the AFC and the PNC. The elite political culture in this country is driven by big party. We hear the terms we use: a big party, small parties, minor parties. And we've become trapped with that nomenclature, which itself has become culture. And that even among the small parties, there are big parties among the small parties, and so on. And what we have here is a situation where the PNC is considered the big party, acts like a big party. The AFC considers itself the second big party. It acts like a second big party, and then the rest of us are incidental. So what you had were two quote-unquote big parties at the table trying to figure out the fate of a combined opposition. What we would have given to have been at the table with the PNC and the AFC in these negotiations. And I'm confident if a party like the WPA was sitting there with these two so-called big parties, I think our outcomes would have been different. And so what we are trying to do is to impose the notion of consensus on a political culture that doesn't operate based on consensus, a political culture that operates based on big parties and small parties. So I feel for the AFC, which has been introducing the notion of consensus on a political culture that doesn't work based on consensus. It works on big parties and small parties. That is why my party, from very early, conceded, look, the PNC is considered a big party. They should have the number one candidate, meaning the presidential candidate. And we were not going to contest that. We were prepared that this number two candidate should be given to the second big party, the AFC. And then we move on from there to the rest of us minions. And that remains our position. A real politics says that you cannot, or you're not going to get the kind of result if you're imposing on the political culture something that it's not accustomed to.
Mr. Hinds, Mr. Hughes, I'm sorry. I'd like to get your response to this. Would you say that the problems of the past, the inadequacy, if one may say that, of how Commingsburg Accord was implemented is a ghost that haunts and makes it difficult for the AFC to arrive at what, from looking from the outside, one may say something more reasonable in its offering and its attempt to strike a coalition deal? Is the ghost of Commingsburg haunting this attempt to arrive at a coalition in this 2025 run up to the elections?
I'm not sure I would necessarily embrace the terms you use, ghost and haunting. What I will say, the experiences of both the negotiations leading up to the Commingsburg Accord and the experiences during coalition, and I would certainly be the first to say that it was a member of the Alliance for Change that brought the government to its feet. But by that time, there were several difficulties. So I think everybody's instructed by their experiences, and the short answer to your question is yes, we are affected by our experiences, but they have to be put in a context. And I'm not seeking to say that the experiences should govern necessarily what happens, but they certainly need to be taken into account so that the possibility of a repetition is significantly reduced.
I'd like to go to Mr. Norton before I give way to my colleagues. Mr. Norton, you were not, I cannot be blamed for any problems one may raise with respect to how Commingsburg was actually implemented once the coalition was formed. You are sort of a fresh breeze in this whole process. Um, Looking back, though, on the grievances of coalition partners in the past, how it is, are you satisfied that you took that into consideration satisfactorily and sufficiently in trying to arrive at a new coalition? And are you of the view that your coalition or potential coalition partners sufficiently took into consideration that they were really shaking hands with someone new and couldn't really bring the bitterness of the past, all of it, and place that upon you?
I wish it was that simple. The truth of the matter is, and Nigel is here, but I did say to Nigel at one stage that the two of us were new and we shouldn't be bound down by the past. I recall making that statement.
I could confirm that. That's a fact.
And so I thought that if the two of us had operated and sought to bring new dimensions to the coalition, we would have been in a better place. Look, all political parties have pro-coalition factors and anti-coalition factions. And in some regard, some of the people who I think put barriers in the way of coalition were people who were inflicted by this history. In fact, I recall saying we would be better moving forward without anyone who was a minister under the APNU+AFC government. One, what I call the baggage of being together, and may I say this? I say this not casting it on everyone, because I can say publicly, Kemraj Ramjatan has always been inclined to coalition. And I recall when at one time some people in the AFC made a proposal while I was leader for the AFC to have its own component in parliament and the PNC to have its own component. I rejected it because I said it will generate problems. I must put on the table that Kemraj agreed and we worked towards dealing with it. I believe that the history of anything impacts the present and the future. And therefore, if we were to have a solution, we had to move away from those who were affected by the past. In fact, when I chose our delegation to meet with them, I chose a delegation, none of whom were involved in the process before, so that they will have their own new insights, etc. Unfortunately, we didn't escape history. History became a burden.
Let me jump in with one, bringing it to the present. Given what has been said, would you gentlemen consider the fact that there has not been success in creating an electoral pact for the upcoming 2025 elections? Would you say that that failure has been because of policy differences, personality differences or the need for political control?
Okay, go ahead, Nigel.
I would say your question is it's what perhaps you call in law leading question. It's limiting the reasons to failure to 3 items. I don't think that it can be so limited. So to be able to respond to that means I'm accepting that one of those 3 reasons or a combination of those 3 reasons is actually the reason why it broke down. So that would be my response to you, sir.
If I may, although I share Nigel's observation, I don't think there's any big policy differences, certainly among the 3 parties that are here. I would stick my neck out and to say that. I don't think that there are personality differences in the main. Nigel, Aubrey, and myself we know each other. We have worked together. We are not enemies. We are not political enemies in that sense. But there are differences in the society that have raised their heads in the process of these negotiations. And it has to be so because our country is in transition to a petro state. And whenever you're in transition, there are some questions that come to the fore. And I don't think we have taken sufficient cognizance of some of those deep underlying questions. There are questions of class that are there in our society, always there, and I think there is there. That head was raised during these negotiations. The questions of race that we in Guyana tend, certainly at the level of our elite political culture, tend to dance around and never really go straight out. And in the age of instant information, the age of social media, there are conversations that are going on all the time. And those conversations are seeping up to the leadership. And so therefore, I would argue that there are issues of race, issues of class, issues of who are entitled to govern that have raised their heads and they have had an impact in the outcome of these negotiations. I think I'm freer than my other 2 brothers to speak on that because it's something that I have been speaking on and my party has been speaking on throughout the negotiations. And I think nothing is wrong with latent class issues in a society. All societies suffer from them. Issues of race, all societies suffer from them. But when you ignore them, when you are making fundamental decisions, that is, you're ignoring fundamental issues and you're trying to make a fundamental decision, then you are going to end up where we have ended up. And so I would say very strongly that there were differences. I don't think it was a matter of personality, a matter of policies, a matter of objective. I think we all want the PPP to go. Okay. I think we are friends and so on, but it's a question of the deep underlying questions that we tend to ignore when we are trying to make fundamental decisions.
Can I go back to Mr. Hughes, if it is not one of those that I highlighted? Would you care to give some pointers about where you think that?
I would ask to politely decline for this reason. We are in the electoral cycle. We are exceedingly close to elections. Any response I give that may not necessarily be accepted by Mr. Norton and vice versa is going to lead to distraction where both of us are fighting towards the removal of the People's Progressive Party. If Mr. Norton says that I wore a blue shirt and I deny it, that will become an issue. And rather than people attempting to look at what the APNU is saying in terms of its policies at the AFC, it gets distracted. So it's not that I don't think I wouldn't want to offer a response. I just believe at this particular point in time and in this climate, it is going to become a huge distraction. And I can't speak for Mr. Norton, but I'd rather not go there at this particular point in time.
I can make a few comments. Unlike what David seems to believe, I'm not restricted in terms of talking on the issue. For instance, the issue of class is an issue I know so well. I mean, I live daily with, if people see me at the Pegasus, they smile and, oh, you're here. But if they see you on Orange Walk, no, you're dealing with ordinary people. And so you see the classism that comes out. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that class plays a critical role. I think we are also cognizant of the fact that race play an important role. In one of the first discussions we had, Nigel and I had agreed that you couldn't have one ethnic group at the top of the slate. And he's here, we can confirm that. And that is an indication that we were well aware that race is going to play. Yeah.
You just clarify that before people think you're talking about the presidential candidate alone. You're talking about the presidential and the prime minister.
Right, when we were talking
that so people don't.
Yeah. No, when we were talking, we agreed that if the presidential candidate was black, the prime ministerial candidate couldn't be, and vice versa. Does that clarify it? Yeah.
I wasn't querying you. I was just trying to make sure that people understand very clearly what you said, because you said top of the ticket, and some people may think top of the ticket means a single position rather than the dual position.
Nigel, in politics, you have to live with those misinterpretations. You get many. But let me say this. One of the factors I don't think people factor in when you're dealing with these issues is that political parties, after surviving a period, develop factions, whether you like it or not. If you go to Dr. Jagan's speech, Burnham's speeches, years gone by, the question of faction always emerged. And I think in the evolution of the discussion on coalition, we saw the emergence of ideas from factions in the political arena that didn't support coalition and therefore generated difficulties. Also, personalities will play a role. There are persons who will always believe that they are more important than the institution. I tell people that I don't know that people in Guyana elect the presidential candidate. They elect the political party and the parties that represent them. So there are a number of factors that we have to discuss to understand why we are here where we are. And I do believe that in all, if not most of the political forces, there are clear pro-coalition forces and there are clear anti-coalition forces. And what happens in the evolution of the decisions in the party is whichever faction is stronger and dominant tend to prevail. And I'm saying this noting contextually that Nigel became leader in June of last year, and therefore I'm not placing any burden on him. He would have inherited a political structure. But we have got to look at all of these variables when I have said to people before, and I could have said it, I've said it before, and I think I did say this to you, David. If the decisions were to be made by Nigel and I alone, I said to you more than once, I believe we would have had a coalition.
I can confirm that.
I want to start off by putting this to the panel. Coalitions have left very significant imprints upon the history of Guyana's politics. And this attempt at the coalition, whether successful or not, is an important juncture in the political history of the country. I ask each of you, how do you see history viewing your leadership, your stewardship as leaders of political parties in this iteration of coalition politics? How would history remember you?
Well, I wonder if before you pose the question, you're limiting this to coalitions. You may remember, I think it was during the 70s, either David or Aubrey can remind me, there was an actual attempt at national unity, and perhaps national unity might be the preferable term. You remember when a lot of the Chandy Singh and a lot of the PPP persons came over to the People's National Congress, that came out of a much broader discussion that was going on. I think Fidel had something to do with that. And so I believe perhaps if we are to be faithful to history, you may want to consider asking about attempts at national unity. Coalitions perhaps are a little narrower, but I mean, I have no difficulty answering your question, but I was just...
I want to say that I agree with you. I agree with you that in the context of uh, the unity and the divisions in the country, coalitions are seen and very often attempted as a vehicle of healing and an attempt at unity. And coalitions' success and failures are often and very often dependent upon how they bring about unity. And I'm glad that you actually have brought that to the discussion, Nigel, and point out that this is really bigger than
Okay.
really political entities coming together. So yes, I agree with you.
No, forgive me again. Coalitions are about unity amongst opposition parties in an attempt to remove what clearly is um, an untenable party in power. National unity is a lot broader than that. So the coalition in 63, 64 was to fight the Jagan PPP. The coalition in 2015 was to fight the PPP, which had become a burden on the Guyana population. That same coalition entered the election in 2020. But I think there's a much broader issue, and I think all of us have touched on it. There are deep fault lines in the country. And if you talk about attempting to reach national unity, that's a different discussion. I only make that comment not to change your question, but to just to give some context to it. And I will back off until my friends have responded.
We're happy for the context, but I'd like to hear from
Well,
you. How,
well,
how,
let me,
how do you think history would judge you? How would history remember you in this moment? I'll move on since you've taken the pass to Mr.
No, I
Norton.
haven't taken a pass at all. No.
um,
Sorry, go ahead, Aubrey.
all right.
But I just want to say, Vivian, I'm not taking a pass. I was
Look,
just giving you some context.
to separate coalition from national unity is a dangerous thing. Coalition in itself is not national unity, but it can lead to national unity. If you look at consociational democracy by Aaron Liphart, what he argued is that once there are these groups and they legitimately represent each other, they can make deals and have a kind of inclusive democracy, what we call power sharing. But to your wider question, Vivian, I think we are treating coalition and unity as if once you start, it's a straight line. It isn't. There is a famous theory that says every time there is integration, the very process of integration produces elements for disintegration, as we have seen in the European integration, as we have seen in attempts at CARICOM integration. A country becomes a little more powerful economically, and that in itself contributes to disintegration. So the first thing I want to guard against is us treating this thing as if it is a straight line. The very process we are involved in, called coalition, the very process we are involved in, called integration, produces the elements of disintegration. And here is where I think the government failed the last time, 2015 to 2020. The failure to manage the process and to minimize the disintegration effect. That is the first point I want to make. How will history see us? I'm not into predicting how history will see us, But what I will say to you, this is an opportunity for us to come together and make the changes that are necessary. But having said that, I'm well aware it's not a straight road, and there are factors against coalition that will affect us moving in the direction. You mentioned the attempts by Burnham and Jagan. 1976, there was such an attempt, but that was driven more by the international dimension of an international socialist world wanting to see the two together. 1976. We then saw, just before 1984, 1985, the same attempt. And a lot of that was underpinned by the international socialist world wanting to see unity. Now, you're in a totally different context, where there is no ideological, there's no affinity to a particular ideology that is pushing people in a particular direction. And after I would say, after Desmond Hoyt start to make the reforms and move Guyana in the direction of a liberal democratic society for the want of a better concept, what you see is the emergence of a new set of dynamics, where you are not here guided by a particular ideological position. You are guided here, in my opinion, by the desire to unseat the PPP. And I do believe it's a good objective. But even if we are to get the coalition and do that, we have to go far past that and to work out the modalities for existence and to transform the society into a society for all Guyanese. The reason why people want coalition is because even in the PPP support base, people are fed up and they want change. People believe under the coalition government there was some progress made in some areas and it was good. And then they carried by the view that the only way to be the PPP is by coalition. This last one is questionable because there are other variables that can cause victory without necessarily. But I do believe if there is a coalition, it makes the job easier. And so, how will history record us? I think history it's difficult to say what history and how history will record us unless one knows the outcome of the coming elections. That, in large measure, will determine how history sees us. If we missed an opportunity or if we took an opportunity and utilize it. Because victory in itself is not a guarantee of transformation.
I'll come back to you on that, Mr. Norton, but we'd like to hear from Dr. Hinds. We'll come back to what you said.
I agree with Aubrey that the outcome of the elections will determine largely how history will judge us. But it's much more nuanced than that. Who records that history? How would one ethnic segment of the society view us as opposed to other ethnic segments of the society view us? So I think it's not a question that one can answer as we speak. But I would say this, that history is not going to spare us. I can say that we are not going to be spared by history because at the time of independence, the question was asked, who governs? Because the political capital was government. Who runs that government? And some choices were made by the PNC and the United Force at that time, and it determined who governed immediately after independence, and I think set the tenor for at least the first 2 or 3 decades of independence. And at this time of transformation to a petrol state, the question is asked is who control the resources that are now coming? It's a fundamental question. And who control the resources is determined by who governs. And so I think if we were to lose our constituency, the opposition constituency, is going to be harsh on us because it would have consequences for the distribution and the management of the distribution of the resources going forward. And so that is as far as I am prepared to go at the moment.
Mr. Norton, I want to come back and to something you said and follow up on it. You said that how history will judge you will depend largely on the outcome of the elections. I tend to agree with that. And I think everyone should. If you win, basically, your instinct was right. And regardless what people may feel before the elections, you would have proven them wrong. You would have proven that politically you made the right decision and that your political judgment and instinct that you could paddle your own canoe in this instance was right. But if you lose, and here's what I think it will come back to: how high are the stakes of the upcoming elections, and are you aware of what the likely consequences of your any failure of your political instinct not to make accommodations in order to arrive at a coalition?
I have serious problem with you finish?
I'm not finished.
Okay, sorry about that.
So those are some considerations. Another consideration I think was touched on by Dr. Hinds, which is what is the extent to which your constituency would like to see a coalition and have given you the mandate to ensure that there is a coalition. In essence, if the two parties, AFC and APNU or PNC, fail to arrive at a coalition, some agreement, some consensus, are they not failing their constituency that have elected them in the leadership position or leadership positions in order to be able to negotiate and negotiate successfully to arrive at this sort of coalition? And so I want to come back to it in that context, but I want to ask you directly, Mr. Norton. I know you would agree that the stakes are very high. I don't think that that is an issue in dispute. Do you think that the failure to go to the polls jointly significantly impair the chances of winning?
The answer for that to me is no. But I do believe if we go at coalition, we are in a better position to guarantee a victory, barring some unknown phenomenon. Don't forget, elections are things that could be unpredictable. But I think also you have narrowed the playing field. If you lose, it will have serious consequences. There's no doubt about that. Not for the Guyanese people. I believe this is an election in which we have to take back Guyana. But then there is also the possibility of a minority government either way. If that happens, you wouldn't be judged as badly. But you can also go as a coalition and lose, which will have a different response. Elections in Guyana are risky. Anybody going into these elections, whether coalition or not, has to put a strong mechanism in place to prevent the government from dominating and controlling and rigging the elections. And therefore, we have got to look at all of these variables when we are determined. I can say to you that I am a supporter of coalition, but I am also a pragmatic politician. I don't want to, in the public domain, discuss things that would have happened that would cause me as leader, if I make certain decisions, to have to go. You know, people treat it as if when you make these decisions, it don't have implications in your party. In the PNC, particularly, the support base doesn't want a situation where you get into a coalition and some of the things that happened previously happen. That in itself puts a pressure on the political leader that when he is negotiating or she is negotiating, they have to take into consideration the national interest as well as the interest of your support base, because you don't get elected without your support base. And so it is not as simple and straightforward. All of us will have to pay attention to that. And so I would say to you, I believe coalition is the best way to go. And I wish we can arrive at a coalition. And I want to make the last point. From the time I became leader, I began to engage the then leader of the AFC, Kemraj. And I think he can attest of the compromises we made to survive after the accord expired. Again, you can verify with him, but I acted in constant consultation with him so that the AFC believed at the time that we were for coalition. I don't want to go into specifics, but there's a particular case in which he came to me and we discussed, and a decision was already made on the PNC side. And I thought in the interest of coalition, I should accommodate it. So I went to our executive, talked to them about it, and we accommodated. I don't want to go into the specifics, but to say to you, you have to have, and here, Nigel, I'm not speaking against you or anything. I'm saying to you, and I already put you in the context of coming last June, but there has to be a partner on the other side that is committed to coalition and can bring along his supporters to ensure that we get coalition politics. And I'm being very careful here in my language. I consider Nigel a friend for years. Politics, unfortunately, and friendship are two different things. And I do believe that there was a lot of scope for us to work things out. But unfortunately, political playing fields are not like that. If all political playing fields were starred and you could have seen straight through the road, I think we would have had a resolution.
Mr. Norton, one of the things you kept saying throughout this discussion is that you believe that coalition is the best way forward. I hear Mr. Hughes saying the same thing, that the better thing or the best thing would be to go to the polls as a coalition. And I heard in response to the question Kendall put that both of you have indicated that there isn't any personality or personal issue that stands in the way. Lots of the things that will make it impossible to arrive at what both of you believe is best for both of you. I'd like to put the question to you now. Is there a possibility that walking out of this conversation today, that yourself and Nigel from the AFC could resurrect or salvage whatever failings that an attempt at a coalition has as of this point in time and make it happen? Or is there some other sticking point, some other obstacle so significant and so big that given the mandate that you and Nigel know that you have from your constituency and their desire for a coalition, your acknowledgement that this is the best way forward, can't you roll away the obstacle that now is in the way and arrive at a coalition?
Were I in charge of the obstacles, I would have said yes, but I am not. We have got to find solutions. But you see, I'm trying to make the point that this thing is not limited to Nigel and I. You're dealing with political parties. You're dealing with political parties that have factions in them. And unless you can sort out that dynamic, you can have problems. If we sort that dynamic out, we can get coalition.
Mr. Norton, are you saying that you are not in hold? You don't have the kind of hold on your party that Mr. Granger had in 2015 when he was.
I never said that, please.
Vivian, I don't think, in fairness to Mr. Norton, that's not what he said. He didn't say he didn't have a hold in his party, and I will confirm before he goes on that we have an excellent personal relationship. So I want to confirm that, but I don't think it's an issue of. He didn't say that. Let me say
let me put the question
that's not what he said.
Let me say what quite straightforward, regardless how the question was interpreted and whether or not the question was put in the right way. Could the two of you commit, given all that we know, to simply make an attempt to arrive at a coalition that will contest the 2025 elections? There is still time. Or is there something that is so significant, whether you care to disclose it or not, that makes that an impossibility? Could you use the abilities of your leadership, your competencies, and given the mandate which we believe is what your constituency would want, to make it happen? That's the question. Well, I'll go around the table. Nigel, do you think that you could give it another shot?
I don't believe this is a question of personal commitment between Aubrey and I. We have both been at this. I don't know. I can't remember when we sent the MOU, and before that we met outside of the country. So I don't think it can be narrowed to the question of commitment of the leadership. The fact that we have set up the apparatus, the various people have met, people have traveled from overseas, etc. So I don't think it can be narrowed to the personal commitment. I think perhaps what might not have been quite fully appreciated in what Mr. Norton said is that there is a political dynamic, as in the political entities that we represent, that perhaps play a greater role in arriving at a solution. Which, and I'm not asking for you to excuse myself or Mr. Norton, but that's what I understand him to be saying. I wouldn't go into the discussions that the parties or the negotiators have had, or I have had with Aubrey and on, but there is that dynamic. Now, it's easy to say, well, you're the leader, and Mr. Norton is the leader. Will share with you, I have said to him, he is probably in a better position to bring his party along than I am. And his immediate reaction to that is, I don't think that you're necessarily right. So all I'm saying is that issue where you're trying to narrow it to the personalities of the two leaders would be unfair. Certainly in my case, I think it's unfair to me. And I would say, I can't speak for Mr. Norton, but I think it would be unfair to narrow it there. It's a lot more nuanced, and there are a lot more issues. Now, you may well say, but what could be more nuanced and what could be more complicated when you're talking about a formidable joint opposition? I hear you on that, but we are where we are.
Well, Mr. Granger,
Vivian,
go ahead.
in fairness,
Go ahead.
A political party is not a piece of concrete. No, you have the individual level, which will be Nigel and I. We could agree at the individual level. But then you have the groups in the party that can have different positions. Don't believe there are people in our party who don't believe we should go it alone, forget everybody else. There are those. But you got to manage it. So there are groups. And then there is the party itself. When all these groups and the various levels come together, and that in itself is never a totally united thing. And then there's the international community that influences, and then the wider society. What you have done is to state what the wider society thinks, or the consensus of the wider society is there should be coalition. But where are the other elements in this process? And one of the things I should say, one of the significant differences of 2015 and 2020 was that nobody believed that they were going to be a coalition. And so a lot of it stayed quiet. And it wasn't the era of the internet. We are operating in a new era in which you got to be very, very careful. Because even as you talk, you could wake up the next morning with so-called influencers carrying positions that sometimes bear no relationship to the talks you're having. So acknowledge the change situation. I think we need to do that.
Dr. Hinds.
If I may jump in.
I want you to jump in, but I want to give a perspective that you could weave into your response so that I don't have to come back and ask another question. If you could weave into your response, why you think former President Granger, given the resistance that he also got and pushed back from the AFC, what was the dynamics that allowed him to be successful along with Comrade Ramjatan, even though Mr. Granger was not so much of an entrenched political figure in the PNC, to be able to pull it off, taking into consideration that you've indicated that Mr. Granger was not really so much a coalition person. And we seem to hear from Mr. Norton and Mr. Hughes that they really believe coalition could be useful. What is your, from the point of view of the leader of the WPA and also as a political scientist?
Different historical moments. They're close, but the moments are different. In 2015, we were not dealing with oil and petrol state and all of that. The stakes in the wider scheme of things were not high. And so the question was not as fundamental as it is today. It was easier at that time to arrive at a coalition. This moment, we have a collision of forces that are underneath and boiling underneath of the leaders. And the leaders cannot ignore those motions that are taking place in the society as they meet. But I want to say, here we are talking about a binary. And the binary has not yielded a coalition. We're talking about AFC and PNC. And it has not yielded. Why not, I would think? Let us try to see if there are no other forces that have entered. If the PNC led APNU, the AFC, the WPA, and I continue to say, as a senior party, we are not granted, even by our colleagues, the kind of agency, if you will, to help in these discussions. How about the AFC, the PNC-led APNU, the WPA? It may be difficult because there's now a breakaway faction from the AFC that has gone over to the APNU. How about if all of us sit down in a room and said, let us now move away from this binary that has not yielded anything substantial in terms of coalition, and let us see what we can come up with. Broaden the framework, move the framework from the binary, move it from the perception that here is this middle class guy who wants to take away this thing from this working class, dark-skinned guy. It's a perception that is out there.
Sorry.
Let me finish, Nigel. Or the perception that here is this guy from this big party who feel that he is entitled to this top spot. How about us moving away from those? And this is not about the two leaders. I'm telling about the perceptions in the society. How about if we try to break those perceptions by bringing more eyes and voices to the table, and let's see what comes out of it.
Nigel?
I was going to say, I can't help the fact that I'm middle class in background.
That's right.
Let me land. And I believe that I made it very clear that I have no desire to lead anything.
Yeah.
I was out of politics since 2016 because they had problems in the coalition. I came back because I thought the country is going over the precipice. So this perception that this is some middle class entitled person who believes that he should lead, forget it. I at a drop of a hat would leave this. That's not an issue for me at all. I believe I have done what I can. I came back, I got elected. But trust me, there's not a day that I believe that this is an entitlement or that my view should prevail. I just want to make that exceedingly clear.
Yeah, Nigel, I was just saying the perceptions in the society.
No, I understand that.
We ought not to ignore them because they do play a role. That's all I was saying.
No,
because
I
there's
understand.
perceptions about Aubrey too. All right?
I know. I just want to say
that's our thing. And so what I'm saying is let us broaden the table now.
I know where you're coming from. I wasn't for a second suggesting that, but I took the opportunity to make that clear because this is for public consumption, not whether you feel that way or not.
Okay, gotcha.
I want to pause also to.
I wanted to say to Nigel, let's recognize that David has never been in the diplomatic service.
David is not a diplomat.
I just say that to say he wasn't in the service.
I would like to ask Mr. Hughes whether he and the rest of the leadership of his party feel that they are weak to the extent that they have allowed the APNU to, or they have allowed at least 3 of their most prominent and executive members to leave their party behind their backs and go and endorse the APNU for the upcoming polls. Isn't that an indictment on you and your leadership?
Well, let me start out by saying this. From the time they had the elections in the Alliance for Change, those 3 persons were clearly committed and part of, I think Mr. Norton referred to the relationship he had with my predecessor. And they were integral and committed to that idea of coalition. They were not happy with the results of the elections in the Alliance for Change. And there was not a single day after my election that they did not participate in acts intended to undermine my management of the Alliance for Change. You may recall when I was elected, I co-opted all 3 of them onto the management committee. Very, very rarely would they attend any meetings. And I think it's in April this year, there was a whole article in the Stabrook News which said that Jurita particularly had been identified as a presidential, prime ministerial candidate for the APNU. The language is her responses are quite telling. She denied specifically that she had been identified, and she specifically said that she couldn't be identified, or Mr. Norton couldn't identify her because that's a matter for her party. However, they have all consistently been there. We've always had our suspicions about them and others. And so this was not a new development, and this didn't happen behind our back. Under the party rules, even though we had strong evidence and great suspicion, we couldn't expel them. So I want to put that in context. Their departure was not unexpected. Their conduct, it was consistent with all the intelligence that we have and had at the time. So insofar as whether they have an impact on the party, of course, there are 3 out of, 9 MPs that sit in the National Assembly. When I took over, in July last year, I didn't interfere with the members of parliament. I left that area specifically for Mr. Ramjitan. And Mr. Ramjitan and that group, as Mr. Norton has said, have been having significant discussions. None of that information was shared with me by Mr. Ramjitan or the state of those discussions when I got elected. So effectively, my tenure was one in which half the time was perhaps spent trying to deal and navigate with where these three people are going, particularly treacherous. So the short answer to your question is yes, it has an impact. Whether it is an indictment on me, I would say absolutely not, because we were fully aware of what they were doing and what their positions were and where their commitments were. So this wasn't a comment on me. I think what happened, they moved at the time that they thought was most opportune, which all politicians do. And that's what it is. So that's my response to you, sir.
And
Nigel, I don't want to prolong it, but in fairness, when I spoke with you, I did say to you that long before you came, Kemraj and I had a conversation, and that in the context, we felt that one possible candidate was Jaretta. And when you asked me, I said to you at the time when we met that there was that discussion, but that no proposal whatsoever was made to Jaretta. And that continues to be the fact up until not this Friday, the Friday before.
But given the fact that both parties and their executive and at the level of their emissaries were engaged in negotiations for a possible national coalition, isn't that side engagement or contemplation of movement by these three persons to the APNU sort of helped undermine the process, Mr. Norton?
There was no side process. When I engaged Jaretta the Friday, it was after we'd received confirmation that the AFC said they were going alone. And that is the fact. The other proposal came after that. There was a proposal which said they were going alone. And then I think the Monday, a proposal came, which was after I had engaged finance. But I don't see the usefulness of it at this stage. We just need to look at how we move forward.
Kendall, you want to comment? Dennis, you have anything else?
No, not to this stage.
Just quickly, so as before we wrap, I mean, it's about another 2 weeks or so before nominations day. Are we saying definitively that the option of a coalition is totally off the table?
Well, it's not nomination day alone. Effectively, you have to submit your symbol by Sunday night. And if you don't submit a symbol, you will end up under one of the two other symbols. I am not a lawyer. Nigel might know more than me. If there is scope for after that day to submit a symbol. But I think the symbol will be critical between now and tomorrow.
It is not necessarily true that there is not a coalition.
There was an opportunity for if there was an opportunity for the AFC to submit a symbol, the APNU to submit a symbol, and there is still an APNU AFC symbol, I would do it to allow the opening.
It is not necessarily true there is not a coalition. There is a APNU coalition. There is the APNU, and there is a WPA that is outside of the APNU. Again, I plead, I think we are making a mistake here. That is the thing. There is a coalition on the APNU side, and I think the AFC has said that it is engaging individuals to join it. And there could be a coalition. We could end up with two coalitions. I guess what you mean is there, if there is no chance of a coalition that includes the PNC and the AFC, that is a correct
What I would say, I'm saying, I understand what you're saying, but I'm saying if there was the scope in law in which you have the APNU registered symbol, the AFC registered symbol, and then the APNU AFC registered symbol, so that if at the end of the process you get coalition, you can still run together. That's all the point I was making.
Yeah. No, not. I wasn't responding to you. I was responding to the questioner.
Dr. Hinds, it's Saturday the 21st. It's Saturday the 21st of June, 2025. What do you see your role as, if any, in trying to strike a deal overnight before the symbols are submitted?
Who the question is directed to?
Dr. Hinds.
Oh.
Yeah, what's your question? I thought it was directed.
Yes, I'm asking what do we see your role as, given the fact that today being the 21st of June 2025 as a Saturday and tomorrow being the deadline for the submission of symbols, is there any role that you and the WPA can play to have these two political parties strike a deal?
If we are asked to play some sort of mediatory role, we would accept. Unfortunately, we have been in constant consultation and meetings with the PNC/APNU on coalition. We have not had any contact with the AFC at all. In fact, the AFC had invited all the so-called small parties except our party. So we have not had any political contact with the AFC all these months. The last time, I think there was some contact. We were trying to put, or we had put a committee together to deal with the GCOM issues, and I think we collaborated, and that was last October, November. We have had no, and we still are at a loss as to why the AFC has totally ignored us in terms of this thing. We have not ignored the AFC. So it may be difficult for us to play a mediatory role in that regard. But we are prepared to try to mediate anything, because I want to say emphatically, both as a political scientist and as a co-leader of the WPA, it is essential for the comfort and the confidence of the so-called opposition support base and the wider society for the AFC and the PNC to be in a coalition. I cannot begin to envisage what this could have on the morale of our people. Now we'll have to work on that. I also cannot imagine the two going in a campaign and having to campaign against each other. And that is going to be very difficult. How are you going to convince the same base to not to quote unquote split the vote in order to win? It's better for us all to be together than to be running separately. And so anything that we are asked to do, we would concede to doing it.
I just want to say, Doc, as a political scientist, you should know that two parties could compete without competing against each other if they have a common enemy.
Yes, I got that. But I mean, in real politics, in our society, where it gets very bad among our supporters and so on, it could not be a nice spectacle, especially when the other side is going to be looking to take advantage of that kind of thing.
Could I give you historical context? There was a campaign in which the AFC campaign and we campaign the first time the AFC emerged, and I don't recall us campaigning against the AFC.
Mr. Hughes,
I certainly would like to say that I don't envisage and certainly would not encourage any attack on the APNU in the campaign, because the focus is on removing the PPP. And I believe that we can set up between Aubrey and myself some form of engagement where, as you say, David, inevitably somebody's going to say something, that we can address it before it becomes unmanageable. I certainly think we owe that. I certainly think I owe that to the base. I speak for myself here.
Mr. Hughes, I have two short questions. One, how do you respond to Dr. Hinds' position that the AFC sidelined the WPA from any engagement? And two, do you see any role for the WPA, which is now aligned with the APNU, in trying to bring your party and the APU together before the sun sets on nomination day?
Let me just, only for historical context so that you understand. I grew up as a child as a WPA student, supporter. I came out of exams. I remember this fifth form maths exams to walk down the road for Walter Rodney's funeral. So I think most, I don't want to say I'm progressive, but most youth at that time were there at the WPA. In relation to your first question, I would be the first to apologize, but I believe what happened by the time we were having those discussions, the WPA had firmly made it known publicly that they were part of APNU, and those discussions were going on in the context of what other possible arrangements they could be outside of the APNU. So that's the context, and I'd be the first to say to David, apologies. Your second question was if it's possible between tonight and tomorrow. There's always hope. So there's always hope. I wouldn't say to you that there's not hope. There's always hope.
Before I go around for final thoughts, I want to say this, that when the stakes are high, deals are struck even when the clock is ticking and there are just hours left before there is some peril. And 24 hours in the history of deal making is lots of time if there is the will and if there is an appreciation of the peril if a deal is not struck, that a deal could be struck by those who are interested. There are dynamics that lie below even the leadership of these two parties that are really preventing this from happening. As leaders, could you go back to your parties? Could you go back to the dynamics and the factions that might be holding things back and preventing things from happening? Taking into consideration what might be the most important thing, that the constituency that the factions represent would rather have a coalition, and that the perils of not having a coalition would be greater than anything than the factions might be seeking to avoid in obstructing or affecting the formation of a coalition. Is this something that you could do within 24 hours or beyond?
I was just going to say we have a David here, and you wouldn't remember the Camp David talks. And the Camp David talks did bring peace temporarily. Well, it did. Sadat and Menachem Begin, I believe it was. But that's on the lighter side.
Mr. Norton?
Go ahead. Sorry, Nigel. I thought you were finished.
I think you should leave me for last since you've been putting me first all the time.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Hinds.
Yeah, no. I look. There's the question of the top of the ticket. I think that is, if I understand the latest proposal from the AFC, they have conceded the top of the ticket. The second position on the ticket essentially is an AFC person. I think we can have some concession there. And so I think the discussion then would be on a common platform, and we cannot avoid the sharing of positions in the government and so on. I don't like the sound of it, but those who are beating us up for that are being disingenuous, because in any coalition you have to decide, you have to negotiate the sharing of positions and so on. I think if we can narrow the discussion down to common principles at this late moment, and come to some kind of agreement on the distribution of the resources, I think we can have a deal. And I would urge my brothers here to come to the table. And I am suggesting that the WPA could sit there at the table, not trying to influence the decision, but to play some kind of mediatory role, a third eye, a fourth eye, a fifth eye, I think could bring something. But I am making this plea to my brother leaders here today. And I've said, the WP has said, I am prepared to serve under the leadership of Aubrey Norton or Nigel Hughes and Nigel Hughes. And we are prepared to step down the ladder in order to accommodate those who are perceived to be bigger players. And I am urging my brothers here, as I did in Buxton when I held their hands together on the 1st of August, I'm signaling to our support base and the wider Guyana that unity must be the watchword. I think we have beaten many odds before. Slavery, indentureship, colonialism, the pangs of neocolonialism. And although this is a difficult moment, I do not think it is impossible for us to sit down one more time and give this a try. In the first instance, it will help our support base. But looking further down the road, I think it could help our country in terms of bringing us to some kind of political sanity. So again, I urge my brothers here, let us give this thing one more try. I think we have all but agreed on some of the sticking points, and there is just, I think, one sticking point, and that is the distribution of resources within the context of a common platform, a common objective, because I think distribution has to be linked to that common objective. And so that's my plea here.
My late father always told me the only thing that beats trying is failure itself. I'm prepared to try.
Now, I'd like to go...
Mr. Hughes.
Of course, I've said you can never close all doors. I've said that before.
Are you prepared to give it a try, Nigel?
Aubrey, don't tell you weren't a diplomat.
Don't answer the man. Don't put it like that.
Yeah, but you've heard consistently through the entire interview what the challenges and dynamics are. Of course, we committed, but this is not only a question of whether Aubrey and I meet here. Certainly, speaking for myself, I would have to go back. I got to discuss all those things. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but it's not as simple as getting on a program and the two of us saying, hey, yeah, there's a kumbaya moment. It's easy to do kumbaya. It's the mechanics after that.
Could I repeat? My late father always told me that the only thing we trying is failure itself. Let us try.
Yeah. Do you believe his late father, Mr. Hughes?
I didn't hear that.
I didn't hear you.
Mr. Hughes, I'm asking if you believe it's the late father.
I never met him, but I certainly believe that failure to try is part of the reason why one would fail.
Gentlemen, at this point in time, we are at wrap up, and I'll give you the opportunity for final words if you would wish.
My closing words will say, I hope at the end of it, whatever happened is for the best of Guyana.
I want to echo that sentiment that ultimately this is about our country, but the recognition that our country is at a very, very important juncture. And whatever happens, one way or the other, out of these elections will have consequences for decades.
I will echo what Aubrey said. Whatever comes out must hopefully will be for the benefit of Guyana. Absolutely. That's the number one priority.
As we approach the 2025 general elections, we find ourselves staring at a fractured opposition. When asked why APNU and AFC have failed to reach a coalition agreement, our guest, Mr. Norton, Mr. Hughes, and Dr. Hinds pointed to three forces: internal party dynamics, the rise of unfiltered online influencers, and the immense pressure of governing a petrostate. All valid points, but what's striking and frankly unsettling is what they both insisted was not the problem. They assured us that there is in fact alignment of will, policy, purpose and personality between them, and that's the part that is concerning. Because if two leaders with so much in common, auditioning for the presidency of a country as fragmented, distrustful, and politically wounded as Guyana, a country with opposing factions, differing policies, clashing ideals and mutual disdain among opponents, cannot reach a compromise because of internal party dynamics, internet influencers, and the realities of a petro-state, one must ask, if alignment is so perfect at the top, why is the base so fractured at the bottom? If the leaders agree on purpose and personality, but can't convince their parties to walk in step, what kind of governance can be expected? Coalition politics was supposed to force compromise, widen the tent, and create space for the multiplicity of Guyanese realities. But instead, it's become a mirror, reflecting elite comfort, strategic positioning, and public disillusionment. So we leave you with this thought. In a country where distrust is as deep as Guyana's rivers, and political wounds are still fresh, is alignment at the top enough? Or does the country need leaders willing to do the harder work, to disagree, to negotiate, to build something messier but more real? Perhaps Mr. Norton is right. There is need for a wider societal coalition. But what are the prospects of that if a coalition cannot even be achieved among like-minded political entities? This program ended with one flicker of hope. Now we must wait and see. This is Caribbean Tea.